I've been very suspect of the claims that Todd's made of Bigfoot's existence, but Dr. Meldrum seems to have proof that an unidentified creature could be out there.
The Bigfoot mystery is finally cracked. Scientists have revealed DNA results that shake the foundation of everything we thought we knew. Forget campfire stories. What they uncovered is far more disturbing. Could the creature we mocked as legend actually be real? And far more dangerous than we ever imagined? Every terrifying discovery has a starting point.
Can you see that? Can you see it? The heat tracker right there.
And with Bigfoot, that story begins long before DNA tests and laboratories. To make sense of the chilling evidence, we need to explore the roots of the legend and why people cannot stop talking about it.
Bigfoot is a mystery that just won't die. Decades of reports suggest it exists.
The legend and what we've been told. Long before smartphones, television, or even the first national parks, rumors of a strange figure drifted through the forests of the Pacific Northwest. People spoke of a towering, hairy, wild man who was said to move silently among the trees. For the Coast Salish people, the figure wasn't a fantasy to laugh about. They called it Saskets, a word in the Halq'eméylem language that meant hairy man. To them, this being lived within the land itself, it was also part of their history and memory. It was less a campfire monster and more a presence that showed people the wilderness was alive. And that presence would not stay hidden forever. When the 20th century rolled in, those stories eventually stepped into newspapers and magazines. In 1929, J.W.E. Burns, working as an Indian agent in British Columbia, published an article titled Introducing BC's Hairy Giants. He gathered local accounts and shared them with a wider audience. For many readers, it was the first time they had seen the word Sasquatch in print. Almost immediately, the article spread quickly, planting the image of a mysterious giant into the minds of people far away from the forests of British Columbia. From that moment on, the legend no longer belonged only to the communities who had carried it for generations. It had entered the public imagination, reshaped and retold in ways that would change it forever. The idea of a wild man, though, didn't belong only to North America. Across cultures and across centuries, people have told stories of human-like beings who lived on the edge of society. Medieval Europe had the woodwoes, a hairy man carved into stone on cathedral walls. In Asia and Africa, stories spoke of similar creatures, part man and part mystery, dwelling in places untouched by civilization. Folklorists point out how often these figures appeared in different cultures, tall, covered in hair, sometimes threatening, and other times revered. It makes you wonder, why do so many cultures dream up the same shadow walking at the edge of human life? Over time, the subtle and layered meaning of these stories was stripped away. In modern versions, Sasquatch became a one-dimensional image, more like a 7-foot creature stomping through the wilderness. It was the perfect fit for headlines and Hollywood, but it stripped away the deeper meaning. For the communities who first spoke of Sasquatch, this figure carried layers of respect, caution, and connection to the land. Listening to those voices shows us something important. The legend isn't only about chasing a monster in the woods. It's about how people try to name the mysteries they see, and how those names echo through generations. And once you start looking at it that way, the line between myth and reality becomes harder to see. Now, it's one thing to pass down tales, and another to let scientists run tests. What did they actually find when they did? The scientific breakthrough. When word spread that Brian Sykes was taking on the legend of Bigfoot, the scientific world raised its eyebrows. Brian Sykes had earned a reputation for being the kind of scientist who could turn old bones into living stories. As a geneticist at the University of Oxford, he became well known for using DNA to solve mysteries that had lingered for centuries. He helped identify the remains of Ötzi the Iceman, and even weighed in on debates about royal bloodlines. So, this wasn't a hobbyist with a blurry photograph. This was a respected scientist known for cracking puzzles many thought were unsolvable. And now, his focus was on one of the most enduring mysteries of all. Sykes called it the first systematic genetic survey of alleged Bigfoot evidence. At the time the investigation started, the plan was to collect as many hair samples as possible that had been linked to sightings of strange primates, then run them through modern DNA testing. Museums, private collectors, and enthusiasts from around the globe sent in their specimens. When the project began in earnest, 30 samples had been chosen for analysis. They came from far and wide, from North America, the Himalayas, Russia, and Southeast Asia. If any hair truly belonged to an unknown creature, this test was going to expose it. The stage was set for an answer science had sort of avoided for decades. Inside the lab, there was no room for long tales or speculation. Each hair went through thorough cleaning to remove surface contaminants. Then the team sequenced a small but reliable fragment of mitochondrial DNA known as 12S ribosomal RNA. For geneticists, this fragment works like a barcode. When you run it through the system, it matches up against known species with remarkable accuracy. If Bigfoot or any other mysterious primate had left its hair behind, the 12S sequence would reveal it. What came next promised to be either a revelation or a reality check. When the results came in, they told a story no one could spin. For those who had pinned their hopes on proof at last, the outcome landed like a cold bucket of water. For decades, the legend of Bigfoot had thrived on eyewitness stories, footprint casts, and grainy footage. Now modern genetics had put the most talked-about evidence under a microscope, and the mystery seemed to dissolve. Of course, the study didn't prove that hoaxes or misidentifications explained every tale. It didn't erase the possibility that something undiscovered might still exist in the wild. What it did do was strip the aura of scientific mystery away from the best-known physical samples. And when science takes the mystery away, what replaces it can be quieter, and, for some, more unsettling. What exactly was found? Would the legend survive this kind of scrutiny? Or was this the beginning of the end for one of the most famous mysteries on Earth? What scientists actually found? When Brian Sykes and his Oxford team revealed their findings, the reaction was mixed. After all the anticipation, after all the hair samples shipped from museums, private collections, and alleged encounter sites, the verdict sounded almost ordinary. Most of the 30 hairs belong to animals we already know, like bears, wolves, raccoons, deer, horses, cows, and even humans. It wasn't the revelation many people had been waiting for. Yet the study had stripped away the uncertainty that folklore had carried for years. Still, what was within the results is something that refused to fit neatly into the ordinary. 2 samples stood out, and they came from the very heart of Yeti country. One was collected in Ladakh, a windswept region of northern India, where a hunter swore he had killed a creature that behaved in ways no bear he had ever seen would. The second came from Bhutan, discovered in a bamboo forest more than 11,000 feet above sea level, where human footprints are rare. When these hairs went through the same DNA testing, the outcome left the researchers staring at their results. They didn't match wolves, brown bears, or any other common Himalayan animal. Instead, the sequence pointed back to something that seemed out of place. The DNA matched an ancient polar bear, a lineage believed to have walked the Earth more than 40,000 years ago. This result even puzzled the scientists themselves. How could hair from the Himalayas carry the genetic imprint of an animal long thought to have vanished before the first human civilizations? The idea of a hybrid was raised, some ancient cross between brown bears and polar bears, but that explanation struggled to fit the geography and history of the region. It left a gap that no one could fill, a gap that kept the mystery alive. The hunter's account in Ladakh made the discovery harder to dismiss. Remember that he had claimed the animal's movements and behavior were unlike any bear he had hunted before. To him, it wasn't simply a misidentified species. The hair he offered became one of the key samples that would puzzle scientists worldwide. And then there was the Bhutan sample, taken from deep within a high-altitude forest, a place few people ever ventured. Whatever left it behind was living in near isolation, hidden in terrain where myths have thrived for centuries. If anything, the implications were more unsettling than a simple no to Bigfoot. On one hand, most of the evidence collapsed into ordinary wildlife. On the other hand, a tiny fraction raised the possibility of a surviving relic from deep time, something blending into the mountains and forests, only rarely brushing against human life. The DNA didn't prove that such creatures were roaming the earth today, but it didn't close the case either. Instead, it left a door half open, inviting more questions than answers. For years, eyewitnesses had described encounters that felt impossible to reconcile with known species. Now, the science suggests that some of these experiences may not be fabrications at all. But if all the hairs weren't from apes or unknown primates, but from bears with ancient genetic ties, could that explain at least some of the stories? Or was there something else in the mix, something science hadn't caught yet? The tension between evidence and experience kept the story alive, refusing to settle into a simple explanation. And this is exactly where the chilling part lingers. Because if the DNA doesn't point to Bigfoot, then what is it that people are actually seeing in the forests, the mountains, and the lonely places where few dare to go? The truth may be stranger than the myth itself. The Patterson-Gimlin deception exposed. After the DNA study narrowed down the possibilities, all eyes shifted back to the most famous piece of Bigfoot evidence, the Patterson-Gimlin film. For years, this short reel carried a weight no footprint or eyewitness report could match. Some researchers even called it the holy grail of Bigfoot proof, because it didn't just show an outline, it showed movement, muscle, and detail. Many experts have studied the frames, and the footage still sits at the center of the argument between believers and skeptics. The question lingers: is this a rare glimpse of a creature in the wild, or a carefully staged illusion? Out of that debate, something unexpected evolved. Rumors began swirling that Roger Patterson had turned to Hollywood for help, seeking advice from people who knew how to build convincing costumes. The name tied to the story was John Chambers, a makeup artist who won an Oscar award for his work on Planet of the Apes. Some articles in the late 1990s claimed Patterson may have reached out to him for ideas, or even costume parts. Chambers himself denied any role, and some researchers who dug into the story argue the link has been exaggerated into urban legend. The result is a charged contradiction, where a single telephone call, if it happened, could change how the film is read. However, could one conversation have changed the way the world sees that film? Well, things got stranger when old TV shows entered the picture. Fans and investigators have pointed to a background creature in a 1967 Star Trek episode called The Galileo 7, and to a werewolf costume from a Lost in Space episode titled The Space Croppers. The theory suggests Patterson or someone connected to him might have borrowed elements from these studio suites and combined them into something new. None of this is proven, but side-by-side comparisons have been enough to spark questions. If the film's creature shares DNA with Hollywood costumes, what does that mean for its authenticity? The history of illusion adds even more fuel to the theory. Long before digital effects, Hollywood already had artists who specialized in making the unreal seem alive. Charles Gimlin, known as the king of gorilla suits, developed techniques to make fake muscles ripple and torsos flex by using clever padding and even liquid bladders hidden inside a costume. These tricks weren't made for science. They were made for audiences, designed to fool the camera. If someone with the right skills blended masks, suit parts, and those muscle-rippling methods, the result could easily look like a living, breathing figure caught on film. The thought raises a chilling possibility. Were viewers watching a wild mystery or a masterclass in special effects? And this is where the story balances. On one hand, the Patterson film remains a striking piece of footage, so convincing that it has resisted dismissal for over half a century. On the other side lies a history of studio rentals, makeup artists, and practical effects that could explain how an ordinary man in a costume became a legend. Every claim seems to spark a counterclaim, keeping the debate alive rather than settling it. Now this tension has made the film more than a mystery. It has turned it into a mirror, reflecting how deeply people want to believe. Either way, knowing the history of Hollywood, makeup and costume tricks forces a hard question. Was the world shown a living mystery, or the work of skilled hands that learned to make myth look real on camera? The man in the suit speaks. From the shaky images of the Patterson-Gimlin film, the world thought it saw a creature that defied explanation. For years, the argument circled back to one question: was it real, or was it staged? The answer finally came, not from the forest, but from an unexpected person who said he knew the truth all along. In the early 2000s, Bob Hieronymus came forward with a claim that rattled believers. He said he was the one inside the Bigfoot costume filmed in 1967. For decades, he kept the story to himself, saying he'd been promised money that never came. He said, "It's time to let this thing go. I've been burdened with this for 36 years, seeing the film clip on TV numerous times. Somebody's making lots of money off this except for me. But that's not the issue. The issue is that it's time to finally let people know the truth." As the money never came, he finally went public and described the experience as a burden he could no longer carry. To him, the creature millions studied frame by frame wasn't a mystery of nature. It was a costume, and he was the actor. This admission sparked a bit of controversy in a way few were prepared for. Hieronymus went further to explain how the illusion worked. The suit he wore wasn't a simple fur stitched together. It had arm extensions that stretched his reach and football shoulder pads that bulked out his frame. In the film, those additions created the impression of a body that looked too long, too broad, and too unnatural to belong to a man. The strange proportions that kept researchers arguing for decades were, according to him, the result of padding and tailoring. It was design, not biology. Now, the story becomes even more complicated when you look at Roger Patterson, the man who orchestrated the whole thing. Far from being a clean-cut explorer, Patterson had a reputation among acquaintances as a man chasing quick money. He was also battling cancer, and some say he was desperate to leave behind something that would provide for his family, and a groundbreaking film that hinted at an undiscovered creature could be that ticket. It was the kind of story that could keep people watching, paying, and wondering for years. But that's not all. There is also this matter of footprints going on too. Patterson had earlier bought carved wooden Bigfoot feet from Ray Wallace, a man infamous for planting hoaxes across Northern California. Wallace's phony tracks had already stirred up excitement long before the film, and the fact that Patterson had access to those props adds another wrinkle to the story. If the film was meant to convince, the props were already in place to back it up. In recent years, technology added yet another piece to the puzzle. When experts began using film stabilization technology to analyze the footage, they found something even more damning. They noticed that the pace of the figure on camera looked human. Once the camera shaking was stripped away and each frame stabilized, the walk looked less like a beast and more like a person struggling to move convincingly in a suit. Taken together, Hieronymus's confession, the altered proportions, Patterson's motives, and the results of modern analysis changes how you see the film. From being a haunting myth captured on film, it becomes something orchestrated to appear mysterious. For some, that realization feels like betrayal. For others, it's confirmation of what they always suspected. But then, was Hieronymus's role the missing key that explains everything, or another twist in a story already layered with rumor, denial, and myth? The hoax legacy. We've mentioned Ray Wallace earlier in this video, but we didn't go in-depth on it. Let's take a look at how he came into the picture. In the fall of 1958, a logging crew in Northern California stumbled upon a line of enormous footprints pressed deep into the mud. The workers didn't know what to make of them, so they called in reporters. Within days, the story was splashed across the newspapers, and a new word made its way into the headlines. Everyone thought it was Bigfoot. This single discovery lit a spark, and almost overnight, the idea of a giant, hairy creature wandering America's forests became more than a campfire tale. And from that moment, the news refused to die. So the question is, who was really behind it? You see, decades later, in 2002, the story twisted in a way no one expected. When Ray Wallace passed away, his family decided to reveal something he never admitted publicly while alive. They brought out a pair of carved wooden feet, oversized and crude, and claimed that Ray had used them to stamp out those famous tracks in 1958. According to them, it was all meant as a harmless prank, more like a joke played on the co-workers and, eventually, on the entire nation. Yet when the evidence came to light, it was not something to laugh about. Could Bigfoot's birth as a household name have been the result of one man's trick? According to the family's account, the trick did not stop at prints. Wallace and relatives reportedly used the carved feet across Northern California, while also planting hair and other samples to feed the rumor. The pieces they later showed to reporters looked crude, 16-inch wooden forms that could be slipped over a worker's shoe and pounded into soft ground. By their telling, what had looked like mysterious tracks was the work of craftsmen and pranksters, not an undiscovered creature. As usual, not everyone accepted the Wallace confession without hesitation. Some researchers argue that the timeline doesn't neatly fit, and that not all of the tracks from that era can be traced back to him. A few claim that certain casts showed details beyond what a wooden mold could reproduce. Others suggest that Wallace may have played a role, but he wasn't the only one fanning the flames. But then Wallace's family was telling the truth. Why didn't the props reproduce the famous prints exactly? And if the props couldn't recreate them, what really made those original tracks? No matter where one lands on that debate, the impact of Wallace's family's revelation can't be denied. It showed how something as ordinary as a carved plank could set off a chain reaction of belief, fear, and fascination. Those prints didn't stay in the woods where they were made. They traveled through countless headlines, and in doing so, they helped build one of the most enduring legends in modern American folklore. The chilling part isn't the idea of a monster in the trees, it's the thought that the monster may never have existed at all. Now we begin to think, was Bigfoot a creature born in the shadows of the forest, or a myth born in the hands of a trickster? And also, if one prank can create a legend, how many more myths are built on secrets we still don't know? It's strange how a wooden prank could ripple into a national legend, but what's even more puzzling is how the scientific world responded once the myth took hold. Instead of clearing the air, their silence and sidesteps only deepened the mystery, leaving us to wonder what was really being kept from the public. The mainstream science cover-up. When the legend of Bigfoot wandered into the halls of science, something unusual happened. Instead of curiosity, the subject was met with cold stares and closed doors. Researchers who dared to take it seriously often found themselves branded as outcasts. Careers that had taken decades to build could be damaged by a single association with a footprint cast or a field report. It didn't feel like science at work. Rather, it felt more like a warning, making it seem like this was a subject better left alone. For those who pushed ahead, the real challenge came when trying to publish. Submitting a study on primate locomotion or anatomy might earn respect, but attach Bigfoot to the title, and the doors seemed to slam shut. Journals often declined such paperworks outright, or buried them in criticism so heavy that only few wanted to try again. In a world where tenure, grants, and reputation depend on acceptance, many scientists quietly decided it was safer to ignore the subject entirely. Which makes you think, was this silence about protecting scientific standards, or about burying uncomfortable data? Well, money is also another factor too. DNA testing, the kind that could put questions to rest, is very expensive. A single sample can cost thousands to process when handled by serious labs. For independent researchers or small teams, that price tag is often out of reach. Even when tests were attempted, the expense meant only a handful of samples ever made it through the full process. And when results came back inconclusive, the disappointment left more questions than answers. High cost and low clarity became a cycle that kept the debate alive. But despite all these, some evidence found its way to the surface. Jimmy Chilcutt, a respected forensic expert, examined footprint casts and pointed out features he claimed didn't match humans. The ridges in the prints flowed lengthwise, not across, and the skin texture suggested a thickness far greater than a human sole. To Chilcutt, these details hinted at something different and unknown. Yet, without peer-reviewed studies to anchor his claims, his observations lived in a gray area, powerful enough to spark intrigue, but not enough to sway mainstream science. Then there was also the Skookum cast, discovered in Washington in 2000. Some investigators believed it showed the partial body impression of a massive, upright creature. They measured the imprint as nearly half again as large as an average human, with proportions that didn't line up with ordinary anatomy. Skeptics countered that it was nothing more than an elk lying in the mud. Two groups, looking at the same slab of plaster, came away with two very different truths. And in that split, the mystery deepened instead of dissolving. On another spectrum, television brought its own kind of attention. Programs like Expedition Bigfoot promised to put technology to the test like thermal cameras, night vision, and even DNA collection. Viewers watched as the shows captured glowing heat signatures, strange nest structures in the forests of Washington, and hair samples collected under controlled conditions. For a moment, it looked like the pieces might fall into place. Yet, when it came time to share full results, the details often faded from view. Lab reports weren't always made public, or they were mentioned in passing without the raw data behind them. This absence left audiences wondering whether the truth was being hidden for drama, or whether the evidence itself failed to hold up under the bright light of testing. And so, the story sits at a strange crossroads. Academic caution, costly lab work, bold forensic claims, disputed casts, and televised investigations have all added pieces to the puzzle. Yet, the puzzle remains unsolved. Every unanswered question and every withheld detail adds fuel to the fire. Was Bigfoot evidence pushed aside to protect careers? Or was there simply nothing solid to hold on to? As long as this silence lingers, the mystery refuses to die. But isn't it strange that with all the studies, casts, and fieldwork, the picture only seems to get blurrier? Because what exactly do we make of a mystery that resists every attempt to explain it away? The mystery remains. Polls never land on the same number, but the picture they paint is striking. Around a quarter of Americans, sometimes reported closer to 29%, say Bigfoot could be real. That means millions of people across the country still believe a giant, hidden creature could be roaming the forests. It is that belief, not the evidence, that keeps the story alive. And when so many people share the same conviction, the story refuses to fade quietly. If belief lights the fire, the internet fans the flames. Grainy videos, shaky phone clips, and suspiciously well-timed photographs race through social feeds and rack up views in hours. Some are simple tricks, while others are carefully staged. With modern tools, hoaxers can make a costume or digital image convincing enough to fool casual viewers. And AI now makes fake stuff harder than ever to spot. This steady flow of content means new sightings never really stop. And the more clicks they earn, the more they spread. Behind those viral moments lies another layer, which is profit. Small towns that host Bigfoot festivals or claim historic encounters see waves of curious visitors. Shops sell souvenirs, museums display casts and blurry photos, and restaurants name dishes after Sasquatch. In places like Willow Creek, this legendary story is already part of their local economy. Tourism thrives on mystery, which means there's always an incentive to keep the story going no matter what. However, not every sighting comes from trickery or tourism. Sometimes the human brain fills in the gaps on its own. Pareidolia, the tendency to see faces or figures in random shapes, can turn shadows, trees, or rocks into something very exciting. Once one person points out a shape, others in the group often convince themselves they see it too. This can be seen as confirmation bias, where people focus only on the details that support what they already believe. And ordinary moments can grow into lasting stories. Moving forward, we have seen that on one hand, science has dismantled most of the evidence with solid explanations, and on the other hand, the phenomenon itself refuses to die. Every debunking leads to the next video, the next cast, and the next believer who swears their story is different. Which leaves us with a haunting thought. In our rush to dismiss the myths, could we be missing the very discovery that started them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on our channel so you never miss any of our uploads. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.